20 strangest abandoned Nazi vehicles found after 80 years. After the First World War, Germany was restricted by the Treaty of Versailles, with an army reduced to 100,000 men and no right to possess tanks, military aviation, or submarines. From 1933 onward, the new regime began a progressive rearmament that completely transformed German industry. Companies such as Krupp, MAN, Daimler-Benz, Messerschmitt, Heinkel and Junkers shifted to mass weapons production, while enormous resources were allocated to the development of armored vehicles, aircraft, submarines and experimental systems. Between 1939 and 1945, Germany manufactured tens of thousands of military vehicles, including more than 46,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, around 120,000 aircraft, and hundreds of submarines. As the war progressed and the military situation deteriorated, many of these vehicles were abandoned due to lack of fuel, mechanical failures, destruction orders, or hasty withdrawals. Some were sunk, others buried, or simply left behind. This documentary presents 20 of those German vehicles, found decades later exactly where their journey ended, preserved as direct witnesses to the final collapse of the German war effort. Tiger I 231 stopped due to lack of fuel in Normandy. In August 1944, Tiger No. 231 was moving slowly along a secondary road near Vimoutiers in Normandy. It was part of a German column attempting to escape the Allied encirclement after the collapse of the front in the Falaise pocket. Combat was no longer the priority. What mattered was moving and not getting trapped. For a tank weighing more than 50 tons, that urgency had a clear limit: fuel. Tiger 231 belonged to a heavy unit withdrawing alongside other Panther, Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks. The area was saturated with damaged vehicles, blocked roads and constant air attacks. In that context, the Tiger ran out of fuel on Highway RN 179 shortly after leaving Vimoutiers. It was not destroyed in direct combat, it simply could not continue advancing. Before abandoning it, the crew placed explosive charges at key points. The detonations disabled the engine and jammed the turret, leaving visible cracks in the armor but did not completely destroy the vehicle. The goal was to prevent its use by the enemy. After that, the crew withdrew on foot and the Tiger was left immobile on the road. Days later, Canadian units advancing through the area pushed it with heavy machinery into a ditch at the side of the road to clear the passage. There it remained, partially tilted. Unlike many abandoned tanks that were quickly scrapped, this Tiger stayed in place. After the end of the war, much of the military debris in Normandy was sold as scrap, the Vimoutiers. Tiger was also acquired by a scrap dealer who removed accessible components such as the transmission and hatches. Even so, the core of the vehicle remained intact, largely due to its size, weight and position. In the 1970s, the inhabitants of Vimoutiers purchased the tank and organized its recovery. In October 1975, the turret was removed and the hull repositioned near the place where it had stopped in 1944. Since then, Tiger 231 has remained on outdoor display on a concrete base, unrestored and with visible damage. It is one of the few surviving Tiger I tanks and one of the rare examples preserved in the same place where it was immobilized during the war. Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, sunken remains of the dive bomber. The Junkers Ju-87, known as the Stuka, was one of the most recognizable aircraft of German aviation during the Second World War. Designed by Hermann Pohlmann for the company Junkers, Flugzeug- und Motorenwerke, it made its first flight on September 17, 1935, and entered service when the Luftwaffe began preparing for a large-scale conflict. The Stuka was conceived as a two-seat dive bomber with a pilot and a radio operator who also acted as a defensive gunner. Its silhouette was unmistakable, with inverted gull wings and fixed, spatted landing gear. From 1936, it began operating in combat during the Spanish Civil War, where it was employed by the Condor Legion as a testing ground before the outbreak of the war in Europe. Between 1939 and 1942, the Ju-87 took part in campaigns in Poland, France, the Balkans, the Mediterranean and North Africa, acting as direct support for ground troops. In those early years, its attack precision made it effective as long as it operated with sufficient air cover. One of its most well-known elements was the Jericho trumpet siren, installed on the landing gear, whose sound accompanied dive attacks. In addition, it incorporated an automatic recovery system that allowed it to pull out of the dive even if the pilot lost consciousness during the maneuver. As the war progressed, the Ju-87 showed its limitations. Its speed and maneuverability proved insufficient against more modern Allied fighters. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, losses forced its withdrawal from that front, although it continued to be used in theatres with less air opposition, especially on the Eastern Front and in the Mediterranean. Between 1936 and 1944, approximately 6,500 examples were produced in different versions. Although its design was outdated in the final years of the conflict, the lack of an immediate replacement meant that it remained in service until almost the end of the war, with variants adapted for ground attack, glider towing, and anti-tank roles. Several Ju-87s ended up far from airfields and hangars. Some crashed on land, others were abandoned, and several ended up sunk at sea. In the Adriatic, divers located the remains of a Stuka that had fallen into the water during an operation. The fuselage, covered with sediments, retained its general shape thanks to the cold water and the low presence of oxygen. Decades later, it no longer conveyed the terror associated with its attacks, but rather a motionless and silent image on the seabed. U-2540 Wilhelm Bauer, a naval design reused after the war. On April 26, 1945, Soviet troops occupied Stettin, putting German naval units stationed in Swinemünde at risk. Faced with the enemy advance, several vessels set sail in early May toward bays located north of Germany, awaiting new orders. Among them was the U-2540, a Type 21 submarine, one of the last additions to the Kriegsmarine. During this movement, on May 3, 1945, the submarine was attacked by a British aircraft. The attack caused the death of 8 crew members, marking the only direct engagement of the U-2540 during the war. The following day, May 4th, at around 800 hours, the crew themselves decided to scuttle the submarine, deliberately sinking it after evacuating the crew near the Flensburg lightship. The U-2540 thus came to rest on the bottom of the Flensburg Bay at a depth of about 50 meters. For more than a decade, it remained submerged. In 1957, after being located, it was refloated through a recovery operation and transferred to the Howaldtswerke shipyard in Kiel after initially being grounded near Eckernförde. The submarine surfaced in a remarkably good state of preservation, despite the time spent underwater. On October 10, 1958, Howaldtswerke AG obtained the contract for its refurbishment. During this phase, the submarine received the provisional name Wal. On September 1, 1960, it was officially incorporated into the Bundesmarine and renamed Wilhelm Bauer with the designation Y880 in honor of the German naval engineer who had built the Brandtaucher in 1850. Under its new identity, the Wilhelm Bauer was used as an experimental submarine. Structural modifications were carried out, including the replacement of the sail, changes to the snorkel, and the removal of part of the original armament. Inside, improvements were introduced aimed at evaluating new propulsion systems, sensors, and habitability conditions. During the first years of service, various technical tests were conducted. Many did not achieve the expected results, but the data obtained served to improve the design of future Bundesmarine submarines, directly influencing several classes that would enter service from the 1960s onward. At the end of the 1960s, the submarine suffered a serious malfunction during a snorkel navigation which caused internal damage and accelerated its withdrawal from military service. It subsequently had a final phase under civilian control as a test platform until further accidents led to its definitive decommissioning in the early 1980s. On June 15, 1983, the Wilhelm Bauer was acquired for historical preservation purposes. After its transfer and adaptation, it was inaugurated as a museum ship in 1984. Today it remains open to the public as the only preserved Type 21 submarine, a physical testimony to a design that arrived too late to influence the course of the war, but survived to tell its story. Kugelpanzer, the spherical vehicle captured in 1945. In the final months of the Second World War, Soviet forces advancing through Manchuria encountered a German vehicle unlike anything seen before. It was a completely spherical structure made of steel with 2 large wheels integrated into the body itself and a small frontal opening. It was not listed in known production records, nor did it appear in German technical manuals. That object was later identified as the Kugelpanzer, a name that literally described its shape. The vehicle was captured in 1945 in territory controlled by the Imperial Japanese Army, an ally of Germany during the conflict. After its recovery, it was transported to the Soviet Union, where it ended up placed in the Kubinka Tank Museum near Moscow. Since then, it has remained on display without any official explanation of its exact function, its unit of origin, or the reason for its deployment to Asia. The Kugelpanzer featured a compact and enclosed design. Its structure consisted of a steel shell with an approximate thickness of 5 mm, sufficient to protect the occupant from light fragments and small arms fire. Inside there was space for only one person, seated in a central position, with access to a basic control system, and without advanced communication systems or complex mechanisms. At the rear there was a small auxiliary wheel intended to maintain stability during movement. The propulsion system consisted of a motorcycle engine installed inside the sphere and directly connected to the side wheels. The estimated speed of the vehicle was low, with figures close to 5 to 8 kilometers per hour, indicating that it was not intended for rapid movement or to operate alongside conventional armored formations. No integrated weapon system has been preserved, nor are there visible mounts for external weapons. There are no official documents indicating where the Kugelpanzer was manufactured. Based on its design and materials, it is considered to have been produced in Germany and sent to Asia during the final phases of the war, although no records have been found confirming its transfer or specific use in Manchuria. Access was gained through a narrow frontal hatch. After its arrival in Kubinka, the vehicle was preserved without major modifications. It was neither restored nor dismantled, and it retains the condition in which it was captured, with visible marks of use and wear. BMW R75, the military motorcycle abandoned during the retreat. The BMW R75 began to appear on the battlefronts when the German army had already understood that civilian motorcycles could not withstand a war of constant movement. In the late 1930s, the Wehrmacht requested from BMW a machine capable of traveling across terrain where trucks became bogged down and light vehicles were rendered useless. Development began in 1938 and production started in 1941, at a time when the war already demanded practical solutions rather than experimental designs. From the outset, the R75 was conceived as a complete unit and not simply as a motorcycle with a sidecar added as an afterthought. The third wheel was not passive, it was connected by a shaft to the rear wheel of the motorcycle, allowing both to drive simultaneously. This system included a lockable differential and a gearbox with selectable ratios for road use or soft terrain, as well as a reverse gear that facilitated maneuvering in narrow or muddy areas. The entire assembly was designed to move with stability on snow, mud, or unpaved tracks, precisely the places where many units would later be abandoned. The chosen engine was a 2-cylinder, 750 cubic centimeter air-cooled boxer producing 26 horsepower. It was not a striking figure, but it was sufficient to move the motorcycle and sidecar combination up to about 95 kilometers per hour on roads and to maintain a steady pace off-road. The fuel tank allowed a range of nearly 250 kilometers before refueling, an important autonomy in areas where supply was beginning to fail. These characteristics led to the R75 being used for liaison missions, patrols, supply transport and reconnaissance, both on the Eastern Front and in North Africa. The sidecar was not merely an additional seat, it had its own brake and space for equipment, tools and spare parts, and in many units a MG-34 or MG-42 machine gun was mounted on a rotating support. With the driver and passenger, the R75 could carry up to 270 additional kilograms, making it a light vehicle with a clear tactical role. In specific campaigns, modifications were introduced, such as additional air filters for desert conditions or external mounts for fuel cans and skis, depending on the unit's destination. During the war, the BMW R75 shared prominence with its main rival, the Zündapp KS 750. Both were evaluated by the Wehrmacht, and after testing, the Zündapp was considered to offer superior performance. In August 1942, the Army promoted a standardization program between both brands. BMW and Zundap agreed to share up to 70% of components and moved toward a hybrid model known as the BW43, which combined elements of both motorcycles. The plan envisaged stopping R75 production upon reaching around 20,200 units, but that goal was never fully achieved. Production continued until 1944 and reached approximately 16,500 units. After the war, some were assembled by the Soviets, while many others were abandoned in forests, secondary roads, and retreat zones, alongside saddlebags, tools, and remnants of personal equipment. Decades later, these finds continue to surface. Some still bear visible markings beneath the moss, and others retain the sidecar attached. They are remnants of vehicles that stopped and were left behind when the retreat advanced faster than those who rode them. Heinkel HE-115, German seaplane for maritime operations. In the mid-1930s, the German Navy placed its confidence in seaplanes as a key tool for operating far from conventional airfields and runways. In that context, the Heinkel He-115 appeared, a twin-engine aircraft designed to take off and land on water, conceived for maritime reconnaissance, mine-laying, and attacks against enemy shipping. The project was developed by the Heinkel Company, and the model's first flight took place in 1936. The He-115 featured an elongated fuselage with a glazed cockpit and two large floats that allowed it to operate from fjords, estuaries, and coastal areas. It was powered by two 9-cylinder BMW 132K radial engines, giving it a maximum speed of around 327 km per hour and an approximate range of 3,300 kilometers, figures that made it suitable for prolonged missions over the sea. The usual crew consisted of 3 men, although some later versions incorporated a 4th occupant. Although initially conceived as an auxiliary aircraft, the HE-115 was soon adapted for offensive missions. It could carry bombs, torpedoes, or magnetic mines, in addition to being equipped with defensive machine guns to protect itself during operations. This versatility made it a common tool of the Luftwaffe in theaters where control of the sea was decisive. With the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, the Heinkel He-115 began to operate on a regular basis. In the early months of the conflict, it carried out night flights over the Thames estuary, where it laid mines that caused the sinking of several British merchant ships. In August 1940, one of these seaplanes located and attacked the New Zealand cargo ship SS Remuera off the coast of Scotland, sinking it after a precise bombing. From 1941 onward, the HE-115 concentrated much of its activity in Northern Europe. Operating from bases in Norway, these seaplanes harassed Allied convoys sailing through the Barents Sea toward the Soviet port of Murmansk. Other units operated from Brest, monitoring the French Atlantic coastline. In these scenarios, the aircraft was used both for reconnaissance and for direct attacks against enemy shipping. The Heinkel He-115 was not exclusive to Germany. Finland used several examples as fast transport seaplanes in the Karelia region, while Bulgaria employed them on reconnaissance missions in the Aegean Sea and the Balkans. Even some Allied and neutral countries operated this model after capturing or acquiring it, such as Norway, Great Britain and Sweden, which used it for rescue duties in the Baltic Sea until its final withdrawal in 1952. A total of 138 Heinkel He-115 units were built. Several examples were lost in combat or sunk to prevent their capture. One of them remained on the bottom of a Norwegian fjord for nearly 70 years. It was located in 2005 and recovered on June 2, 2012, becoming the only Heinkel He-115 recovered intact. The aircraft had first served in the Norwegian Navy and was later reused by Germany until its loss in 1942. Panzer II Luchs, the light tank used only for reconnaissance, the Panzer II Luchs. Luchs appeared at a time when the role of light tanks was already in crisis. By 1942, the German army had realized that the early Panzer II models could not face Allied tanks in direct combat. Their armor was insufficient and their armament was outdated. However, reconnaissance remained a critical necessity. Panzer divisions required vehicles capable of moving quickly, observing the enemy, transmitting information, and withdrawing before becoming engaged. The Luchs was created to fulfill that specific role, not to win battles. Development began in April 1939 under the experimental designation VK1303. MAN was responsible for the superstructure while Daimler-Benz designed the chassis. The project was based on earlier prototypes, the VK901 and the VK1301, but the new vehicle needed to be larger, more stable, and with better mobility. The result was a light reconnaissance tank with a low silhouette, wide tracks, and interleaved road wheels, a solution typical of German engineering to better distribute weight over soft ground. The first operational prototype was ready in April 1942. An ambitious initial order of 800 units was approved, although the reality of the war drastically reduced that figure. Production finally began in September 1943 and ended in January 1944, with only 100 units manufactured, in addition to the conversion of 4 additional chassis. All production Luchs tanks were equipped with the 20mm KWK-38 automatic cannon, as the plan to mount a 50mm KWK-39 gun in a larger turret was cancelled before reaching production. The Luchs weighed around 13 tons and was crewed by 4 men, an important difference compared to earlier Panzer II models. The commander no longer had to load and fire the main weapon at the same time, improving coordination during reconnaissance missions. The Maybach HL62 TRM engine allowed it to reach a maximum speed of around 60 km per hour and travel up to 290 km without refueling, high figures for a tracked vehicle of its time. The Luchs armor was limited, with a maximum of 30 mm on the front. Its survival depended on mobility and avoiding direct combat. Reconnaissance units used it on both the eastern and western fronts. In Normandy, some served with the 9th Panzer Division, which had 26 operational vehicles in July 1944. After the withdrawal from France, the unit surrendered in the Ruhr in 1945, when many Luchs had already been lost due to breakdowns, lack of spare parts, or the impossibility of recovery. The Panzer II Luchs FL remained linked to armored reconnaissance as its primary function. Messerschmitt ME-262, the fighter of the future used during the retreat. The Messerschmitt ME-262 appeared in the European skies when the course of the Second World War was already decided. Although its development had begun in the 1930s under the direction of Willy Messerschmitt, it did not enter operational service until 1944, at a time marked by constant bombing, fuel shortages, and a general withdrawal of German forces. The Me-262 was the first jet fighter used in combat. Its arrival marked a clear shift in military aviation, but it was too late to change the outcome of the conflict. Units that received it operated from dispersed airfields, adapted roads, and improvised runways due to the destruction of airbases. In this context, many aircraft were incomplete, damaged, or rendered unusable before entering action. In 1945, faced with the Allied advance, orders were given to destroy or bury aircraft that could not be withdrawn. At numerous airfields in southern and central Germany, Me-262s were dismantled, burned, or covered with earth and rubble. Engines, fuselage sections, and cockpits were hastily hidden around the runways as units retreated. Over time, excavations near former airfields revealed compressor blades, sections of Jumo 004 engines, fuselage fragments, and cockpit parts. In many cases, the pieces appeared deformed or corroded, reflecting the deliberate destruction suffered in 1945. Engines were among the most commonly found components. Made with limited materials, they had a short service life and were often removed before the aircraft entered service, which explains why numerous Jumo 004 engines were stored or buried separately. Decades later, these remains allowed the reconstruction of the final step toward jet propulsion. Some recovered fragments were transferred to museums and technical collections without being restored. Others still remain underground, in old runways and improvised airfields. The Me-262 ceased to exist as an operational force during the German retreat. No complete units remain, only scattered remnants from which its history is now reconstructed. Borgward IV, the radio-controlled explosive vehicle. The Borgward IV, officially designated SDKFZ-301, was a German radio-controlled vehicle used by the Wehrmacht for demolition tasks during the Second World War. Its development began before the conflict, when the German army requested a tracked vehicle capable of carrying heavy loads on the front lines without directly exposing the crew. The project was assigned to the Borgward Company based in Bremen, which delivered the first prototypes in the late 1930s. In its early tests, the vehicle was conceived as a munitions carrier, but from 1940 the concept changed. Experiences on the Western Front demonstrated the usefulness of employing remotely controlled vehicles to destroy fortifications, minefields, and obstacles without risking engineers. From that moment, the Borgward IV was adapted to carry a removable container with an explosive charge of up to 450 kilograms, which could be released and detonated once the target was reached. The vehicle could be driven manually by an operator to a safe area near the front. From there, control was transferred to radio operation from a command tank, usually a Panzer III, a Sturmgeschütz III, or, in later phases, a Tiger I equipped with the corresponding control system. The control range reached approximately 1,500 to 2,000 meters, depending on terrain and interference conditions. The explosive charge was carried in a container located at the front. Via a radio signal, the container was released, sliding forward, and could be detonated remotely. This system allowed the chassis to survive the explosion and, in theory, be recovered and reused, distinguishing it from other smaller demolition vehicles used by Germany at the same time. The Borgward IV used a 6-cylinder water-cooled Borgward gasoline engine. In early versions, the engine developed around 49 horsepower, while the final version reached 78 horsepower. Its maximum speed ranged from 38 to 40 kilometers per hour on roads, with an approximate range of up to 150 kilometers at medium speed. The transmission system included a torque converter and an automatic gearbox with 2 forward and 2 reverse gears, facilitating remote operation. Between 1942 and 1944, about 1,180 units were produced in 3 variants. The Borgward IV was used in combat from 1942, with notable deployment at Kursk, later in Normandy, and during the Warsaw Uprising. In 1945, some chassis were improvised as Panzer and used in a limited way in Berlin. After the war, most were destroyed or scrapped. Only a few examples remain today in military museums, serving as an early record of the use of remotely controlled ground vehicles. Volkswagen Schwimmwagen. Type 166, land and water in a single design. The Volkswagen Schwimmwagen Type 166 was designed from the outset as a military amphibious vehicle, not as an improvised adaptation of a land model. The reason lay in its shape. Unlike other light vehicles, the Schwimmwagen did not have a conventional chassis. Its body was a sealed steel hull, designed to float from the first sketch. The decision was made by Erwin Kommender, a designer working with Ferdinand Porsche, who understood that an amphibious vehicle could not be adapted from a structure intended only for land. The first attempt, known as Type 128, quickly revealed its limitations. It was too long and fragile to withstand continuous use off-road. After initial testing, the design was reduced, reinforced, and converted into the Type 166, which entered production in 1941. Manufacturing was distributed among several facilities. The KDF Stadt plant, now Wolfsburg, and the Porsche factory in Stuttgart assembled the vehicles, while the metal hulls were produced in Berlin. Between 1941 and 1944, 15,584 units were built, making the Schwimmwagen the most produced amphibious vehicle of the entire war. That number explains why examples still appear today, even though most similar vehicles disappeared decades ago. At the end of the war, many Schwimmwagen remained where they had last been used. Some sank in rivers or flooded fields, others were abandoned in ditches. The sealed hull slowed deterioration and allowed several to retain their original shape for decades. After 1945, some were reused for civilian purposes, while others remained forgotten until rediscovered. Today, fewer than 200 examples survive worldwide, and only a small portion has done so without extensive restoration. The Schwimmwagen Type 166 reappeared as a complete vehicle, in some cases still capable of floating after decades of abandonment. Focke-Wulf FW-190, silent fall off the coast of Norway. In the summer of 1943, a Focke-Wulf FW-190 of the Luftwaffe ended its journey far from any airstrip. The aircraft fell into cold waters off the coast of Sotra, Norway, after a mission from which it never returned to base. It remained submerged there while the war continued and the front moved on without looking back. The FW-190 had entered service in 1941, designed by Kurt Tank for the company Focke-Wulf Flugzeugbau. At the time of its loss, it was already one of Germany's main fighters, present on almost all fronts. Unlike other aircraft that crashed on land or were dismantled after forced landings, this plane was preserved by the environment in which it fell. For decades, it remained underwater, protected by the cold temperatures and the low oxygen levels of the fjord. That environment slowed the deterioration of metal, paint, and internal components. Over time, the aircraft became covered in algae and sediment, but its silhouette remained recognizable, with the fuselage resting on the seabed and the wings still attached to the main structure. The discovery occurred many years later, when Norwegian divers located the remains of a relatively intact German aircraft in the area. Upon examination, they identified features typical of the FW-190, such as the compact fuselage shape and the characteristic radial engine at the front. The cockpit, though open to water, retained original elements, including instruments and parts of the control panel. The aircraft had made a controlled water landing before sinking. There were no signs of explosion or catastrophic impacts, suggesting the pilot managed to maintain some control during the final moments of the flight. No human remains were found at the site, and no documented evidence exists regarding the pilot's ultimate fate. During recovery operations, the state of preservation surprised even specialists. The radial engine retained its complete structure, and parts of the landing gear, integrated armament, and internal systems remained in their original positions. The exterior paint still showed fragments of the colors used by the Luftwaffe, protected for years by the sediments. The extraction was carried out carefully to avoid structural damage. The aircraft was slowly lifted and transported ashore where stabilization began. The goal was not to return it to flight, but to preserve the original components as they had remained since 1943. Once out of the water, the FW-190 was documented before any intervention. The fuselage, engine, cockpit, and wings retained the condition in which they had ended their service. The aircraft recovered off Sotra became part of historical studies and exhibitions on Second World War aviation. Today, it can be observed almost exactly as it was at the end of its last flight. Kettenkrad, created to land with paratroopers. The SDKFZ-2 Kettenkrad was not conceived to patrol roads or impress with its appearance. Its origin was marked by a very specific problem that arose in late 1938 within the Luftwaffe. The new German paratrooper units, the Fallschirmjäger, could be deployed from the air quickly, but once on the ground they were limited. Their light artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, and anti-aircraft weapons still depended on horses, mules, or the soldiers' own strength to move. This nullified the main advantage of airborne troops: speed. The requirement was almost contradictory. A vehicle was needed that was powerful enough to tow pieces up to 750 kilograms, but also small enough to fit inside the fuselage of a Junkers Ju-52. Additionally, it could not be dropped by parachute because the maximum allowed weight was around 800 kilograms. The order was processed through the Waffenprüfamt 6 and designed by engineer Heinrich Ernst Kniepkamp, who registered the design in June 1939 under the designation HK-101. The solution broke with conventional logic. Instead of a conventional tractor, the Kettenkrad combined a rear tracked system with a single front wheel similar to a motorcycle. It was not a motorcycle, despite its name suggesting otherwise. It was a complete half-track, but reduced to the bare minimum. That front wheel was not decorative. It allowed the vehicle's overall length to be reduced and facilitated crossing ditches, trenches, and steep slopes. It could even be removed for air transport or to traverse particularly difficult terrain. Production was assigned to NSU Motorenwerk AG in Neckarsulm, which began manufacturing the first units in 1941. Later, Stowerwerk AG of Stettin joined under license, contributing approximately 10% of the total. In total, about 8,800 Kettenkrad were built during the war. The engine came from the Opel Olympia, a water-cooled four-cylinder of 1,478 cubic centimeters producing 36 horsepower. This allowed it to reach about 70 kilometers per hour on roads and travel up to 250 kilometers on a full tank. Its operational debut occurred during the invasion of Crete in May 1941. There it became clear that the vehicle could fulfill its original function, but also that it served many more purposes. On the Eastern Front, it was used as a light artillery tractor, infantry transport, ambulance vehicle, scout and cable layer. In North Africa, it operated with the Afrika Korps, and in mountainous areas it was employed by Gebirgsjäger units where other vehicles simply could not advance. Toward the end of the war, the Kettenkrad was used as a jet aircraft tow vehicle, dragging planes such as the Me-262 and Arado AR-234 from hangars to runways to save fuel. After 1945, production continued for civilian use, and many units were used in agriculture, forestry and service. Some remained operational for decades, extending their use beyond the conflict. Linsen, night attacks with no return. The Linsen were small German explosive boats designed for radio-controlled coastal attacks. The name Linse referred to their small size. Their design was deliberately simple. Wooden boats, lightweight, with an explosive charge at the bow and a car engine at the rear. The pilot occupied an open position, unprotected, sitting between the explosive and the engine. They were not intended to return intact after the mission. The operational concept of the Linsen relied on group work. They normally operated in threes. Two of the boats carried the explosive charge, while a third, called the control boat, had the function of guiding them via radio once the pilots jumped into the water. The attack began with a slow approach at night. When the target was aligned, the explosive boat pilot set the course, jumped into the sea, and was picked up by the control boat. From there, the explosive-laden boat was guided to impact the enemy ship. Linsen began to enter service in 1944 when Germany's military situation was already unfavorable. They were integrated into special Kriegsmarine units for coastal operations, especially in the Adriatic, Baltic, and some parts of the Mediterranean. Their use required very specific conditions: good nighttime visibility, relatively calm seas, and lightly protected targets. In practice, results were limited. The boats had stability problems, were difficult to handle in rough seas, and radio control systems were vulnerable to interference and failure. In several documented attacks, they lost course, detonated prematurely, or failed to reach the target. Linsen were used in real actions and, in some cases, damaged smaller vessels, but they did not achieve significant sinkings nor alter the naval balance. Human losses among operators were high. In 1945, many were abandoned in ports, beaches, and improvised bases, or sunk to prevent capture. After the war, only scattered remains remained in coastal areas, along with documentary references in former operational zones. Panther Aus G, a battle tank hidden in a basement. In July 2015, German authorities confirmed the discovery of a Panther Aus G tank hidden for decades in the basement of a private residence near Kiel in northern Germany. The discovery occurred during a judicial investigation related to the possession of historical military material. The vehicle was fully integrated into the underground structure of the property and had remained unknown to the public since the end of World War II. The tank identified was the Panzerkampfwagen V Panther, officially designated SDKFZ-171, a German tank developed from 1942 and produced in large numbers between 1943 and 1945. The located unit belonged to the Aus G variant, the last version produced of the Panther and the most numerous during the war. Despite the decades that had passed, the hull, running gear, and several main parts remained in remarkable condition. The Panther was designed under the direction of MAN, with additional production by Daimler-Benz and Maschinenfabrik Niedersachsen-Hannover. Its development was directly influenced by combat on the Eastern Front, where Soviet T-34 tanks demonstrated a clear advantage over earlier German models. To respond to this threat, the Panther incorporated sloped frontal armor and a high-power cannon, making it one of the most feared tanks of the conflict. It was powered by a high-performance Maybach engine, capable of moving its more than 40 tons at high speeds for a vehicle of its size. According to judicial reports, the Panther was stored after the war by a private individual along with other historical military objects, including demilitarized artillery pieces and heavy weaponry. For decades, the tank remained underground, protected from the elements and without direct exposure. Extracting the vehicle required a specialized operation due to its mass and the need to avoid structural damage to the house. Technical teams and Bundeswehr personnel participated in the process. Authorities determined that the vehicle remained subject to German legislation on military material. In 2021, a Kiel court ordered its transfer to an authorized institution, establishing a legal period for its sale. The tank was not linked to a battlefield or a specific unit, but to the private management of military remains after the war. It remained hidden for decades in a residential environment. Today, the Panther joins the small number of surviving units preserved in specialized institutions, with a condition marked by its prolonged storage under a civilian residence. Dornier Do 17, found intact under English waters. The Dornier Do 17 was one of the most used bombers by the Luftwaffe in the early years of World War II. Designed by Claude Dornier for Dornier Flugzeugwerke, it made its first flight on November 23, 1934, and entered operational service in 1937. From the beginning, its extremely slim fuselage drew attention, earning it the nickname Flying Pencil, a direct reference to its narrow and elongated shape. The original project was not intended as a combat aircraft. The Do-17 was initially conceived as a fast civilian plane for mail and passenger transport, but evaluations showed its interior was too narrow for that purpose. Still, its structure provided enough space for a bomb bay, and this feature marked its conversion into a high-speed light bomber, supported by the German Air Ministry in the mid-1930s. The Dornier Do-17 was a twin-engine aircraft with a high-mounted wing and twin-tail configuration powered by 9-cylinder BMW 132 radial engines. In operational versions, it reached speeds close to 400 kilometers per hour, a high figure for its time. The usual crew consisted of 3 men, distributed in a glazed cockpit with good visibility for attack and reconnaissance missions. Its combat debut took place during the Spanish Civil War when it was used by the Condor Legion starting in 1937. There it demonstrated speed and maneuverability at low altitude, though its vulnerability to modern fighters was also evident, a limitation that would accompany the model throughout its career. At the outbreak of war in 1939, the Do-17 served as a frontline bomber. It participated in Poland, France, Norway, and the Battle of Britain, attacking infrastructure, airfields, and troop concentrations. As the conflict progressed, its limited payload and relatively short range relegated it compared to more modern models. Production ended in the summer of 1940, when it was progressively replaced by the Junkers Ju-88 and the later Dornier Do 217. Nevertheless, the Do-17 continued in service until the end of the war in secondary roles such as reconnaissance, glider towing, training, and special missions. In total, approximately 2,100 units were built, many exported or used by Germany's allied countries. After the conflict, almost all Do-Sespadsmit disappeared. They were scrapped, lost in accidents, or abandoned in old airfields and combat zones. For decades, it was believed that no complete unit survived until sonar detected the silhouette of a submerged aircraft in the sands of Goodwin off the English coast. In 2013, the Royal Air Force Museum recovered the only known Dornier Do-17 in practically complete condition. The plane had fallen into the sea in 1940 and remained underwater for more than 70 years. Sand and cold waters preserved its structure, although extremely fragile upon emergence. The rescue required a prolonged process to remove salt and prevent corrosion. Today, the Do-17 remains as an authentic example, recovered after decades submerged and preserved as a historical object. Bergepanther, the vehicle that pulled tanks from the battlefield. The Bergepanther was a German armored recovery vehicle developed during World War II from the Panzerkampfwagen V Panther. Its official designation was Bergepanzerwagen Panther, also identified as SDKFZ 179. It entered service in 1943 and remained active until the end of the conflict in 1945. Its development responded to a specific need. Existing recovery means, such as the SDKFZ-9 half-tracks, were not capable of reliably towing medium and heavy tanks like the Panther or the Tiger, and it was not permitted to use other operational tanks for that task due to the risk of losing both vehicles. In 1943, it was decided to create a dedicated heavy recovery armoured vehicle with the company MAN in charge of the project. The first Bergepanther was built on a Panther Ausf D chassis from which the turret was removed. Subsequent production was undertaken by MAN, Heinkel, Daimler-Benz and Demag. The design retained the Panther's basic structure, incorporating minor modifications and some changes introduced in the Panther Ausf G toward the end of 1944. The usual crew consisted of at least 3 men. In the upper space of the chassis, a wooden and metal structure was installed to house a longitudinal winch with a capacity of 40 tons. At the rear, a stabilizing platform was incorporated to anchor the vehicle to the ground during towing operations, as well as a rig capable of lifting loads of up to 1.5 tons. The sloped frontal armor provided sufficient protection to operate even under enemy fire. The Bergepanther could recover Tiger tanks and different Panther variants without difficulty, a capability that was recognized in British reports prepared after the war, which highlighted its reliability under combat conditions. The armament consisted of a machine gun mountable, according to crew needs, on one of the side mounts of the chassis. In early versions, a 2cm KWK-30 automatic cannon was also used, replaced from 1944 onward by an MG-34 machine gun. The vehicle weighed around 43 tons and was powered by a 12-cylinder Maybach HL230P30 engine with an output of 690 horsepower. It reached a maximum speed of close to 55 km per hour and had a road range of up to 320 kilometers. Between 1943 and 1945, approximately 339 Bergepanther were produced. After the war, several were abandoned during the German retreat in Poland, especially in the area of the Pilica River, where numerous vehicles of the 19th Panzer Division were documented as being left behind in 1945. Many were later removed or disappeared during infrastructure works, while other remains were submerged with the creation of reservoirs. Years later, research operations made it possible to locate some of these vehicles underwater. One of them was identified as a Bergepanther and transferred to the Polish Army Museum in Warsaw. Goliath SDKF Z302, the cable-guided explosive vehicle. The Goliath SDKF Z302 was one of the most singular vehicles used by Germany during World War II. Its development began in 1942 when the Wehrmacht Armaments Office commissioned the company Borgward to create a small vehicle capable of transporting an explosive charge to an enemy target without directly exposing a soldier. The concept was based on a French prototype designed by Adolphe Caigres, located after the occupation of France. From that model, Borgward developed a small-sized vehicle, officially registered as Sonderkraftfahrzeug 302 and known as the Leichter Ladungsträger Goliath, intended to advance toward a target and detonate an explosive charge by remote control. The Goliath measured around 1.5 meters in length and weighed about 370 kilograms with the charge included. Armor was minimal, limited to protecting the internal mechanisms. It carried an explosive charge of 60 kilograms, sufficient to damage fortifications, armored vehicles, or defensive structures. It moved on tracks driven by 2 electric motors powered by batteries, reaching a speed of around 10 kilometers per hour. Its range was limited, with distances of up to 1.5 kilometers on roads. Control was carried out via a control box connected to the vehicle by 2 cables wound at the rear, with a maximum length of 650 meters. Through them, the operator guided movement and activated detonation. After the explosion, the vehicle was destroyed. The Goliath began to be used in combat from January 1942, mainly by engineer units and panzer formations of the Heer. It was employed in scenarios such as Anzio, Normandy, and the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. Its effectiveness depended on the cables not being damaged and on the vehicle managing to approach the target without being detected. Limitations soon became apparent. The vulnerability of the cables, low speed, minimal armor, and high cost for a single-use system reduced its effectiveness. These difficulties drove the development of the gasoline-powered SDKF Z303. Between 1943 and 1944, around 7,564 Goliath units were produced. After the war, many were abandoned or rendered unusable. The SDKF Z-302 was recorded as one of the first systematic attempts to employ remotely controlled ground vehicles in combat. Bauer 349 Natter, the most extreme interceptor. The Bauer 349 Natter was an experimental German rocket-powered interceptor designed for vertical takeoff. The project emerged from a call issued by the German Air Ministry to several companies, including Heinkel, Junkers, Messerschmitt, and Bauer Werke GmbH. Bauer's proposal was the most extreme. The Natter was conceived to attack bomber formations directly after a vertical launch from the ground. The design was led by Erich Bauer together with engineer H. Bethbader, and from the outset it was envisioned as a simple aircraft, manufacturable with unskilled labor and with the smallest possible number of complex components. The Natter had a very basic structure with extremely short wings and no ailerons. Lateral control was achieved through differential use of the elevators. The fuselage included a small cockpit and a Walter 109-509-2 rocket engine capable of producing up to 1,700 kilograms of thrust for about 70 seconds at maximum power. For vertical takeoff, 4 solid-fuel Schmidding booster rockets were added, each providing approximately 1,200 kilograms of thrust for 10 seconds and jettisoned once expended. The first examples were ready in October 1944. Initial testing was conducted without an engine, with the Natter towed by a Heinkel He 111 to evaluate its gliding characteristics. In December of that same year, unmanned launches using only the booster rockets began. The first complete vertical flight without a pilot took place on 23 February 1945. A few days later, the first manned vertical launch was attempted. Test pilot Lothar Siebert took off successfully, but during the climb, the cockpit canopy detached. The aircraft lost control and crashed from a height of just over 1,000 meters, killing the pilot. That accident marked the practical limit of the program. The operational concept of the Natter was straightforward. Takeoff was carried out under autopilot control, and manual control began once the aircraft reached the altitude of the enemy bombers. The attack was executed by releasing the nose section, which contained a battery of 24 73mm Föhn rockets. After firing, the pilot was to bail out by parachute. The rear section of the fuselage incorporated a braking system to allow recovery of the rocket engine for reuse. Production was limited to a small test series. Both the SS and the Luftwaffe placed orders, but no aircraft ever entered combat. In April 1945, US forces captured several examples at the Bauer factory. Some were sent to the United States and others were destroyed. Today, remains, replicas and concrete launch platforms survive in the area around Kirchheim on Teck. These are the only physical traces of a project developed in the final months of the war. The BA 349 Natter remains an experimental program that never reached operational service. V3 Hochdruckpumpe, the secret project beneath the hill. The weapon popularly known as the V3 supergun was officially designated by Germany as the V3 Hochdruckpumpe. It was part of the Vergeltungswaffen program, intended to attack Great Britain from the European continent. Unlike other weapons in the program, it was a fixed, extremely long artillery piece designed to bombard London from the coast of the English Channel. Research began in 1942 with the idea of building a weapon capable of firing without air support. In 1944, the project was formally integrated as the V3, and development was concentrated in underground installations excavated near Mimoyec in northern France, where a network of tunnels and galleries was constructed inside a chalk hill. The gun was designed with an exceptionally long, smooth-bore barrel and multiple lateral chambers that propelled the projectile progressively along its length. The goal was to maintain constant pressure in order to reach London. The projectiles, about 3 meters long, were stabilized by fins, since the barrel lacked rifling. Early tests conducted in early 1944 at Hillesleben revealed serious problems. The projectiles failed to reach the required velocity, and the increase in pressure caused frequent structural failures. Sections of the barrel cracked or lost material, generating a high number of unusable components. In response to these failures, the KWIE was brought into the project. Under the supervision of Friedrich Körber, scientist Peter Badenheuer analyzed the materials used and determined that the steels employed could not withstand the extreme pressures. Changes were introduced in the manufacturing process, and special steels were studied with the support of Röchling and Mannesmann, which partially reduced the failures without resolving them completely. The remaining alternatives involved reducing the weight of the projectile or the propellant charge, which compromised the weapon's range. While technical problems persisted, the Allied landings in Normandy in June 1944 altered the strategic situation and placed the installations at risk before the weapon could become operational. Allied bombing severely damaged the Mimoyex complex and rendered several galleries unusable. The V3 project was abandoned without a single operational shot being fired. Today, the tunnels and unfinished structures remain as the physical remnants of a weapon that never entered service. Horten Ho 229, the only surviving example at the Smithsonian. In the early 1930s, Walter and Reimar Horten began experimenting with flying wing designs, departing from the conventional aircraft configuration of their time. Both spent years developing tailless gliders, convinced that this scheme could reduce aerodynamic drag and improve performance. During these early experiments, the brothers built and flew several gliders in civilian clubs, experiences that laid the foundation for a more ambitious project. When Germany began rearming its air force, that experimental concept was already mature enough to consider its application in an actual combat aircraft. In 1943, the head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, issued a specific requirement: an aircraft capable of carrying 1 ton of bombs, covering long distances and reaching jet speeds. Existing bombers could not meet these requirements. The Horten brothers submitted their private design as a direct response to this demand, proposing an aircraft without a fuselage or tail, powered by jet engines. The project was approved by the Reich Air Ministry, which ordered its development under the designation Ho 9, later known as Horten Ho 229. Construction was assigned to Gothaer wagon fabric, and a combination of steel and wood was chosen due to aluminum shortages. Part of the surface covering included carbon mixed into the material, a detail later studied for its effect on radar detection. The first prototype, an unpowered glider, flew on March 1, 1944. The second, equipped with Jumo 004 jet engines, conducted its first flight in January 1945. Shortly afterward, on February 18, 1945, that prototype crashed due to engine failure during a test. Pilot Erwin Ziller managed to leave the aircraft, but he died days later from the injuries sustained. Despite the accident, the program was not cancelled. Göring ordered production to continue, and the HO 229 was included in the Jaeger Not program, an emergency plan to accelerate the development of low-cost fighters in the face of the Allied advance. By then, several prototypes and pre-production airframes were at various stages of assembly, although none entered operational service. With the war nearing its end in spring 1945, US forces advanced rapidly through Germany. In this context, Operation Paperclip began, an initiative aimed at capturing advanced German technology before it fell into Soviet hands. A Horten glider and the Ho 229 Phi-3, which was in final assembly, were located and secured by US forces. The Ho 229 Phi-3 was first sent to Great Britain and later moved to the United States, where it was studied by engineers at Northrop, a company that had also worked on flying wing designs. Other incomplete airframes were deliberately destroyed to prevent capture. The aircraft never flew in combat, nor was it mass-produced. Today, the only surviving Ho 229 is preserved at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Maryland. The aircraft remains incomplete and unmodified for flight, retaining the condition in which it was captured. It represents the end of an advanced project that arrived when the conflict was already decided and has been preserved as a physical artifact of a war in its final phase. This fate was not unique to a single design. During the conflict, vehicles, weapons, and systems were developed and produced to sustain total war, many of them created urgently and used for a limited time. When the military advance stalled, those tools ceased to fulfill their function. Some were abandoned, others partially destroyed, and several preserved over the years. Today they remain as material records of a war-oriented industry and the moment when that machinery stopped advancing.